Welcome to the Bird's Nest Podcast. I'm Joe Donahue. Thank you so much for joining us. Our next guest is somebody I've been looking forward to talking to for quite a long time. He's the inspiration behind why I got started here in this space. He's known for such amazing YouTube videos as Conversations with Puppy Episode 1, but you probably know him as the guy behind the 30 and 30 and international stadium tours for St. Jude, or his Packast series, or his coach series, or for his NFL reaction videos. It's the 2023 NFL Fan of the Year, Tom Grossi. Tom, thanks so much for stopping by.
What an intro, Joe. What an intro. I mean, listen, who can forget Conversations with Puppy? Just a immediate, iconic video that has stood the test of time for years.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of those things. You think Tom Grossi, that's the first video that comes up. And
First one, the first one, only one, really.
absolutely. No Jordan Love reaction video, no any of the other stuff. It's Conversations with Puppy.
Yeah, of course. No, thanks for having me, Joe. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, Tom, I wanted to start here because this is actually, you shared on social media a little bit, hoping to close on a house in a few weeks.
Yeah.
You've been planning for the last few years. So tell me what's going on. Tell me what your thought process is. You've been very open about the fact you became a Packers fan at 6 years old.
Yep.
And you've been living away from Green Bay for quite some time, for your entire life. What if 6-year-old you knew that you were moving to Green Bay or Wisconsin in general in the imminent future? What would be going through his mind?
See, I don't think there would be an insane amount of surprise that eventually I would find my way to Wisconsin. I think because I didn't make it to Green Bay until I was in my 20s. So I became a fan at 6 years old. I went to my first NFL game when I was 10, and I saw the Michael Strahan break the sack record against Brett Favre because Brett Favre was like, come hug me. And I think we won like 35-3. I remember that was the first time I ever saw a group of Packers fans like all in the same place. It's the first time of like being able to scream "Go Pack Go" with other fans, and going there for the first time. Like I remember it vividly. It was for a Chiefs preseason game where Kmart was across the street, and then there was Lambeau Field. There was no title town or anything like that. And I think the bigger surprise, or the thing that hasn't fully hit me yet, is because I picked up a camera 9 years ago, now I'm able to afford to like a house, to be able to buy a house in Wisconsin, to be able to make this move. That's pretty crazy because I will be very honest with you, on a teacher salary, there was no way this was happening. So for it to happen now, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of panic, especially because we are so close to the season and it's a big move and it's a big change. But man, I just couldn't be more excited for that possibility. I'm going to see it for the first time. And yeah, while there's a lot of stress and a lot of panic and a lot of things that need to get done, yeah, it's a pretty surreal moment that I'm sure is going to hit me harder at some point.
Certainly. And that kind of also springboards into this idea, you being a Packers fan, but being so far distant from Green Bay.
Yeah.
And my own experience growing up in the Philadelphia area, being an Eagles fan my entire life. Dad's had season tickets for eons. Highlights some differences between that long distance fan. Which is not something that I've necessarily experienced myself.
Sure.
And yet there's always a draw. I see this on social media from Eagles fans who are drawn to the city of Philadelphia. There's always this draw to the place where the team plays. Even if the team isn't playing, even if you're going to the city for a summer, for a day, there's always this draw that sort of seems to elevate the fandom. Is that something that you've experienced? Or
Yeah, I think it's a couple things, right? I think that being away from the Packers for so long and loving them from afar, from 1,000 miles away for so long, I think it just gives you a sense of gratitude is one of them. But like I remember like my first Packers hat, like it's really that guy right there. That's my second Packers hat. Like these are things that this was it's not pre-internet, but it's back before the internet was the internet. I couldn't buy Packer stuff at whim, right? And so, or on a whim, I should say. And so I had like a Packers hat, or maybe I had two at some point, like after I was like 8 years old. And then I had a Packers jacket. And it was even just seeing Packers memorabilia, because in New York, they only sold Giants, Jets, and then the occasional Buffalo Bills thing. I never even saw a Packers merch in the mall. Like I never saw it like going out to shops or anything like that. And I remember still getting off the flight, my first time ever flying into Milwaukee when I was 20 something years old, and I saw Cheeseheads at like the airport shop, and I was like, oh man, like I'm going to be able to get a cheesehead, right? Like it's that kind of stuff. So I think that there's always that draw, because especially as a distant fan, or long distant fan, I should say, there's a draw because you're going to be surrounded by people that are going to support the same thing that you're going to support when it comes to the football team. And particularly with Green Bay, it is so pivotal. Like the Packers are Green Bay, right? And Green Bay is the Packers. So I think that being there in that specific place in Green Bay, Wisconsin is just a very special thing, because if you love the Packers, oh boy, that's a place for you. If you love football, it is an experience going to Lambeau Field and experiencing Green Bay. So I think there's always going to be that pull, especially if you're a fan living out of state or living far away. And it was something that I talked a lot about with fans when I was in the UK or when I was in Germany or Mexico or Brazil. I'm talking to these fans who they don't get Packers games, or they didn't get Packers games for a really long time. They've never been to Green Bay, Wisconsin. They might never go to Lambeau Field. They might not have the opportunity to do so. And I think it just gives you a further respect for the fandom, because even like when I was 6 years old, like I didn't know if I'd ever be able to go to Green Bay, Wisconsin. It was really expensive to go there. So to be able to go there and visit, one, I'm really grateful for. But two, I think there's always going to be that pull, because when you get there, there's going to be fans of a similar mindset there.
Yeah, and certainly that ability to be a long distance fan has gotten more robust in recent years with the expansion of primetime games, with the say what you will about NFL Sunday Ticket, but
Sure.
the fact that it's available and the fact that you can buy into it and you can catch your team from wherever it's broadcasting, you don't have to have, like for Eagles fans, there is definitely that connection. And just like what you shared with the Packers, with the Eagles, as the Eagles go, so goes the city of Philadelphia. You could
Yeah.
really tell when the Eagles fell off the wagon at the end of last season. And
Yeah.
you could just tell how the morale of the city just kind of deflated
Yeah.
as the fans were coming to that realization. So there's definitely a little bit of that draw there, but it definitely has grown to be a lot more of a robust experience for the long distance fan. Something that certainly you've probably seen even on your 30 and 30 tour,
Sure.
certainly among the international fans, because you got to be really dedicated to be able to stay up for whenever you got to stay
At
up for.
2 a.m. to watch it. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why they had the international stadium tour, because they deserved it. And I think just you mentioned how easier it is. Yeah, I mean, obviously now it's a million different streaming sites, but it is easier to be a fan long distance. You can use the internet to order, Packers hats or any, whatever team you're supporting. So I think it's definitely gotten easier, but that pull is always going to be there. I mean, I am going to Green Bay in a few weeks because I go every year for training camp, because during the season I'm not able to make it out for a game because it would just screw up the schedule way too much and I have to stream and all that. But now it's a way to be like, okay, I still want to go, because every year, like, I want to experience being in Green Bay. I want to experience being there, like going to Lambeau Field, even if it is for a preseason game, because it's something you go back to every time.
Mhm. And it's something that the local fans sometimes can take for granted, is that novelty of the experience.
Sure, sure, absolutely. But I mean, if we're just talking specifically Green Bay, man, I mean, yeah, they love the Packers, man. It's a special place. They love the Packers.
Yeah. Now you alluded to this, or we've alluded to this. You started Packcast after the Packers postseason loss to the Seahawks in 2015, and I can see that shudder. You're coming up on 9 years of Packast this fall.
Yep.
What has been the biggest thing that surprised you over the course of the last 9 years operating in this sports media, YouTube, podcasting landscape?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think it has shifted so many times. I mean, 2015, I did the reaction video, and then I did a couple after that, and like Game of Toms and stuff, covering Game of Thrones on YouTube. But Packcast was just a podcast. And I put the first episode up on YouTube, but it was Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tuesday was recapping the Packers game. Thursday was previewing the upcoming matchup with a fan from the opposing team. So I got to meet a ton of fans. Like, and there, it wasn't necessarily content creators because there weren't a ton of them for each team. So it was me going into subreddits and you could still find it. It was like, need a Broncos fan. That's how I met Brandon Perna. Like, need a Lions fan. Like, that's how I met a lot of the people through that. So the fandom has been awesome. And that's been kind of a core thing that I've always been drawn to. And even though I don't do a ton of those anymore, because quite honestly, it's just the time commitment is too much during the season now because I don't cover just the Packers anymore. Back in the day, it was just Packers. And after 2015, I remember my first episode that got 1,000 people to listen to it, and it was the Rams episode. And I was like, oh man, I didn't make any, I mean, $0 because I didn't monetize it. I didn't get ads, anything like that. I was just doing it because I loved it. I was doing it alongside teaching. And going through the years, 2016, I started putting some more stuff on YouTube just because I was like, oh, more people have access to it. More people are watching it. So I got to make a video component, which was great. But the problem was I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to edit. The equipment I had was not ideal. I had to start getting lights. So I got my first light set, but I went to Home Depot because I couldn't afford it. I went to Home Depot and I bought PVC pipe, bought a PVC cutter, and I bought like individual bulbs and I bought clamps and I made my own lighting system. Literally, the lights are still hanging above my bookshelf. And it's just as time has gone on and trying to adapt to it and knowing that I didn't have the best equipment. I know it wasn't going to be the best content because I was still learning how to do it, but I was going to be the quickest if I could. And so that's why, while I was teaching, I couldn't do anything. But when I got home, I dedicated like every second to this and just like trying to work on this and trying to make it better. And as time went along, we're getting to 2018, 2019. Starting in August of 2019, it'll be a 5-year anniversary this year. This August, I have not missed an upload Monday through Friday. So I've uploaded something, either streamed a short when those became a thing, or a video Monday through Friday. And I think it's just that work ethic hasn't changed because, especially when I left my job, it was, oh God, now I need to do this to survive. So we got to make this work. And so I think what's changed the most is there have been, I mean, just in this past year, it's just the opportunities have been crazier. Yeah, obviously the NFL has started to buy into content creators a little bit more, which has been nice. I got to go to the combine through the YouTube program, so that was really cool. And I think it's just starting to scratch the surface of what content creators can do on here. But for me, I mean, the changes haven't been a ton, except more people are listening and watching. And because of that, we've been able to do crazier things like 30 and 30, the International Stadium Tour, do these fundraisers where we raise so much money. And I mean, I've been doing Q&A since 2018, right? So like Friday Night Q&A, I remember when 2 people were in there and I was like, nobody's got any questions. Okay, I'm just going to rant for 15 minutes and then log off because there's no one here. I remember all that. And now there's 50,000 people for the 49ers Packers game, right? So I think it's just keeping that in mind that because I don't take sponsors, because I don't do that, like I work every day. I work every day because if I don't, like, I'm not going to make money. I can't put out a video and be like, all right, I'm good for the month. We're good. So I think it's just staying true to it and the ability to do crazier things, which in turns helps more people because a lot of it is catered towards charity. That has been the biggest shift. I never thought in my life I would do 30 and 30. When I started Packast, I never thought I would do 30 and 30. That was an idea that happened in the shower and it led to madness. So I think just the scope of it has increased significantly. And that has brought upon challenges, but some really amazing opportunities.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely very noticeable is the fact that the sports media landscape in general has definitely shifted in the direction of
Yeah.
more online stuff. I mean, You look at how successful the guys like Pat McAfee have gotten over the
Sure.
years. You look at how successful or how many people are turning more towards those newer outlets, those newer sites, those newer channels. Because the barrier for entry is so low now because
It
everybody's
is.
got a camera on their phone for the most part. And then that does create its own challenges because I think
Sure.
still, depending on where it is, and I've run into this myself a few times, the sports media landscape is so very oriented still towards the traditional media,
Sure.
working for a major newspaper or a major television outlet or what have you, in order to be able to cover your team. So much of that is still present, but because the barrier for entry is so low, it makes it that much easier to come in and make an impact, however small that might be.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. Like I couldn't do this off my phone in 2015. You know, like I still had like okay, my flip phone, like we're rocking. It had a keypad and everything back in my day. But it's more of it was oversaturated in 2015 when I did it. It's like, oh, another person has a podcast. And that's why I was like, all right, I want to make it different where I interview fans from the opposing team. Right. And going forward, like you talk about guys like McAfee who built themselves up, and McAfee's talked about this too. The one thing like he's talked about what he would have done sooner is go to YouTube sooner, because this is why like full blown, like I'll always support, or be on YouTube because it's free. Yeah. Are there more ads now? It's a pain in the ass? Absolutely. But it's free. And so the broke college or high school kid who wants to hear about their favorite team, I'm never going to put that behind a paywall. Right. McAfee was able to grow so much that now he's with ESPN, right? And I think that it does two things. One, it provides a path that goes, oh, if I am able to make it big on YouTube, that is a potential. That'd be really difficult. You're going to have to work years and all this stuff, but it's a potential. But I also think that there is something to be said about staying independent that I think a lot of fans gravitate towards, because it doesn't have to follow certain guidelines. It doesn't have to like fit within this box of traditional media. It can be different. It could be a scripted series where you're recapping all of Sunday's game, through a skit. It can be, GPS. It can be, the game streams. God, you want to talk about things changing. The game streams from where I'm watching the Packers, right? And now there's 20,000 people in here and we're all watching the game together. It's a different way to watch the game. And I'm not even showing anything and they can't even hear anything.
Yeah.
But I was doing it because I was like, I'm going to turn on a camera because I'm going to watch all the games anyway, right? Like I'm going to watch football and I'm going to scream, I'm going to yell, I'm going to react to it. So I might as well like turn on a camera and maybe some people will enjoy it as well. And that has taken off to crazy heights. And I think it is really difficult, I think, to break into this now. You talk about accessibility, definitely the easiest it's ever been in terms of like technology and stuff. But yeah, like it's oversaturated as hell. And this is why I tell this to people every single time. Started in 2015. It took 3 years to make $200. I could not quit my job for 6 years, and that was working two jobs to make this work. So, it's definitely not a gimme, but there's a path. It just might take years to get there, and you just got to get better and better, and who knows what happens.
Absolutely. One of you've been very forward about your basic advice, which is get started and then be consistent, and that's
Yeah,
something that you've modeled. But one of the things that I've found as I've been trying to start out in this space, the unspoken third rule that I've discovered has been build relationships,
sure.
which is something that is which is something that I found. So even if you don't necessarily have the ability to go down and cover your team every week, you can
Mhm.
still build relationships with like the PR people that are there,
Sure.
or building relationships with guests that you might have, building relationships with PR people at the league, which was how I was able to talk to Troy Vincent a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Um, Things like there, and then building a relationship with your audience, even if you're not having any other guests on your show, you have a relationship with your audience. Can you
Yes.
speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny you bring that up too, because when I went to the combine, which was my first combine ever, I didn't know what the combine was. And what I mean by that, and let me be very specific, I know, like, yeah, a bunch of people are running and doing 40s and like doing drills and all that great stuff. That's all we know the combine is. The combine is just networking, in which like you go to a bar in which Ian Rappaport, like every single like Coach Sean Payton was there, Mike McDaniel was there. All these people are there and they're just mingling and networking, and there's scouts and there's all these people. And like I got to meet so many people through the combine and through that experience. So you're 100% correct. Networking can make your life a million times easier just because you have more connections with people. So if you're trying to get interviews or even just like get kind of caught up with the team, it helps. When I interviewed Mark Murphy for the first time in 2016, I realized very quickly, like, oh, this is the big leagues, right? Like the Packers are letting me in here, whatever, whatever. And I saw the Packers as a tower, and I could, knock on the door and just be like, hey, can I be involved? Like, do I want to work for the Packers? Is that a goal? All this stuff. And it became pretty evident pretty quickly that I didn't necessarily want to work for the Packers. I'd love to work with the Packers, but I wanted to build my own thing. I wanted to build my own tower. So when it got to a point, instead of knocking on a door, like it could reach across and be like, hey, this is who I am. This is what I can offer, et cetera, et cetera. But you mentioned one thing, and I think it's the most important thing. And it depends on what kind of creator you want to be, right? If you want to be a creator that just like makes videos or streams and then just walks away from it, that's cool. That's totally fine. I think there's a huge difference between making content and making a community. And the community aspect is something that is incredibly important to me. 30 and 30 doesn't happen without this community. We don't raise $1 million for charity without this community. And that takes time and investment from the creator, right? So Friday night Q&A, every single Friday night, except for the random ones I'll miss because I'm traveling or something. We've been doing that since 2018, and that's every single Friday. Whether there's 200 people in there, whether there's 1,000 people in there, Friday night Q&A, right? 7:30 p.m. Eastern, I'm gonna be there. And I think just that continuity, the streams, and getting to know people and being like, oh, they just bought a house, they just got a dog, they just had a baby, they just lost their dad. Learning about people and like building those relationships, I think is so pivotal, because then it becomes more than just football. Then it becomes like, oh, Tom is doing a fundraiser. So yeah, let's go do that. There's a trust that's built there as well. Like I tell people, like, I don't sell you anything, right? I'm not trying to sell you anything. I don't want to sell you anything. I don't like to sell people things, because God forbid that product is not up to the standard that I would want it to be. I am not going to pitch terrible earbuds to, a broke college kid. It's just not my vibe. So I think building that community, if that's the route that you want to go, that's the most important thing that you could do. Because once you start seeing it as just numbers, I think you lose a little bit of that authenticity. And when I mean numbers, I mean views, I mean subscribers, I mean revenue, I mean the whole thing. Because at some point, like, yeah, you could get all of that. You could get money, you could get resources, you can get all that stuff. But if you don't continuously build that community, or if you're not doing it that way, build great content and continue to make good content, people are going to leave, or people are going to be like, all right, because there's a million other options, Joe. Right? People don't have to watch games with me when I do game streams. People don't have to watch Friday Night Q&A. It's a choice that they're actively making. And so I think that is the most important thing of what has built this. Every single time there's been a viewer, a subscriber, what have you, I am grateful. That is why, like, during 30 and 30, everybody gets their hand shaken, right, in a picture, because like I'm not going to leave until that happens, because who am I to turn them down? So I think that keeping that in mind of what kind of creator you're trying to be is going to aim you in the direction of like, okay, am I building a community, or am I building content, or am I going to try to do both? Sorry for the very long-winded answer, but yeah, like that's legit, like how this was able to continue to snowball into being what it is.
Yeah. And that community thing is can be very, very huge, depending on, again, the style of content that you want to put out.
Yeah.
Now, again, it's great having you on. It's great talking with you. But at the same time, you and I are going to be enemies in a few weeks, because
True.
the Eagles and the Packers are going to be facing off in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Yes.
Packers rookies reported today as we're talking. The Eagles will report next week for training camp, so we're still a bit of a ways out from the opener, and we're still talking about teams on paper. When you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, what scares you as a Packers fan?
That they got competent coordinators now. I mean, the last time that the Packers played, Jordan Love came in at the last second, threw a nice pass to Christian Watson that went for a touchdown. But you guys ran all over us. It was like 300 yards. Like you just beat the crap out of us on the ground. So we don't know what our defense is going to look like. In which we have a new defensive coordinator. We'll see what it looks like under Halfley. We'll see if we can actually stop the run this year. But yeah, it's the mobile QB because that has been the Packers' kryptonite forever, and Jalen Hurts is very much that. You have amazing receivers, you have dynamic weapons, you have Saquon Barkley now, so that's a thing. So I think it's just how high powered that offense is, and we were talking about this on GPS today. The depth pieces you have, even on defense, in which you have drafted these guys who are like household names, and guys like Jalen Carter. I mean, even like Nolan Smith, right? Don't get to see a ton of him. Like, who knows what he's going to do this year? Like, when he came out of college, everyone was like, this guy is an athletic freak and is going to be a monster if he can develop. And then, of course, you go and get Quinion Mitchell, who I loved coming out of college, and you get Cooper DeJean. Oh, great. So you make the secondary even have more depth. So I think it's just with competent coordinators and depending on what the coaching is going to be like this year, I think it's going to be more of a scary Eagles team that can beat you in a multitude of ways. And so my biggest concern is like, how is the defense going to adjust to that? Because, okay, cool. If we are going to try and stop the run and stop Saquon Barkley and stop Jalen Hurts, then you got AJ Brown to worry about, right? Then you got Devontae Smith to worry about. So I think it's just they have so many weapons to beat you. It's just going to be a matter of pick your poison, what's going to be the best way and try to get them off the field.
Absolutely. And then I will. I would agree with you. I think the biggest question mark in my mind, and I mentioned this before on other episodes of my own show here, was the fact that coaching question is like, whose offense is it going to be going into the year? Reasonably confident with the defensive coordinator, and some of the stuff that I heard even coming out of OTAs was really promising in that regard. Mm-hmm. So at that point, we just have to see here in Philadelphia how that pans out in training camp and on the field. For that week one game, what should Eagles fans be concerned about coming from spending all of your time, or as we face off against the Packers?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of unknowns, but there's a lot of excitement in Green Bay because I'm going to leave the defense for a hot second. But the idea is that they're going to get after the quarterback and stop the run. That's what Halfley's been talking about a whole lot. We'll see if it actually happens. The offense, though, there is just so much potential there. And there are so many high ceilings. You talk about the receivers, right? So young, dynamic, really started to come into their own and started to gel with Jordan Love, who we'll talk about him right now, behind an O-line that should be pretty darn good because by the end of the season, they started to gel because it was a mess in the beginning. And I'm really excited to see from this really young offense, like how Jordan Love can pick up his game. And just again, Christian Watson going to see a hamstring specialist. I think he went to Madison for that because that was a constant issue. Eric Stokes, he sought out help as well. He's going to be back on defense. But I think the biggest question mark is that run game, Josh Jacobs. So we know more Aaron Jones, but you got Josh Jacobs and behind that O-line, which is a much better, it is much more run friendly than the Raiders were, that offensive line that we have. So I think just allowing or having Josh Jacobs there to be the punch you in the face, try to run on the Eagles. I'm really curious to see like what that matchup is going to look like. I imagine it's going to be a healthy dose of the run because LaFleur sometimes does like to run the ball, even though we want him to run the ball a lot more. I know Eagles fans can, we could commiserate about wanting our teams to run the ball more. You guys just made it happen and bullied your team into doing it, which I respect so much. But yeah, it's just there's so much young talent there. And I think that any one of those receivers can pop off, whether it's going to be Watson, it could be Dobbs, it could be Jaden Reed, it could be Bo Melton, and it's just going to be a matter of similar things, not to the caliber of AJ Brown or Devontae Smith right this moment, but it's just any one of those guys could take it to the house.
Absolutely. And certainly that youngness of the team is definitely a concern of mine. Of the Packers is a concern of mine, as well as seeing what tricks Jeff Halfley rolls out for the Packers. Because, I mean, The Eagles aren't um, the Eagles aren't going to see anything coming out of Packers training or looking at Packers training camp
Sure.
preseason. That's all vanilla.
Yeah.
Is Brazil ready for the game since you were there?
Dude, I mean, let me just be very honest with you, Joe. It is gonna be a Packers home game. Like, and it's just gonna the amount of Packers fans that are in Brazil is significant. Like, there is a huge fan base there. And yeah, Brazil's ready. Man, I I'm so glad that I wish I wasn't sick, but I'm so glad that I got to go dispel some of the stupid green rumors. And really it's a massive city. I mean, you have 22 million people that live there, right? And there's going to be areas that are not great, just like I live outside New York City. Same exact thing. I think it's just I'm so excited for the Brazilian fans to be able to experience NFL football, which the first game in South America. It's the first game in Brazil, obviously. And I'm just so excited for them to be able to experience that. The stadium is gorgeous. And I mean, gorgeous. They have a university in it. Like they have like a school in the stadium. They got a gym. They got meeting space. It is beautiful. So, and that was I just did not know what to expect heading into Arena Corinthians. And so yeah, Brazil is super ready. The fans are super ready, and I'm really excited to see like how that's going to be presented on TV. And I think you're just going to have a crowd that is just going to be so happy to be watching NFL football.
Absolutely. Well, we'll see all that unfold in just a few weeks after training camp, after preseason games, and after Labor Day, September 6th.
That's
It's
it.
on. Tom, thanks so much for stopping by.
Appreciate you, Joe. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. You can check out Tom on YouTube at Tom Grossi or at Tom Grossi Comedy on all of the socials. And thank you so much to everybody for tuning into the Bird's Nest Podcast. You can support the Bird's Nest Podcast by liking and subscribing to Bird's Nest Media right here on YouTube, as well as by sharing to your social media pages. You can also find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, and the Odyssey app. Please visit birdsnestmedia.com for additional Eagles coverage. And if you feel so inclined to support us in a different way, you can find the link to our Patreon in the description below or at birdsnestmedia.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's go Eagles.